everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Hack, and in this video we'll be doing something a little bit different. This is sort of like a build video, but not. I want to answer the question, are unarmed builds now viable in the Elder Scrolls Online? I got thinking about this recently because the last few patches actually had some changes put into the game regarding unarmed setups. Specifically, they increased the damage of unarmed attacks. They also have been tweaking the amount of resources that unarmed heavy attacks restore to your character, which really got me thinking, why are they making these changes? And is ZeniMax planning to do maybe unarmed combat in the future? But we're not quite there yet, but I did test some unarmed builds on the public test server, and they are surprisingly fun and playable. So in this video, I'll show you how I set up my first unarmed quote-unquote monk build for the Elder Scrolls Online. And then we'll also talk about a couple very easy things that ZeniMax could add to the game to make these builds incredibly strong. All right, let's talk about classes first and what I think fits best with the overall concept of a monk. Now, it's going to depend a little bit on the type of theme that you're going for. All 6 classes can technically work, and it'll give you sort of a different flavor for an unarmed or monk style build. But I think some classes do have a few better skills that maybe push them to the top of the list. Now, as far as the Nightblade, I think Nightblades could actually be one of the best classes for increasing your damage in an unarmed playstyle. That's because they have skills like In-Cap Strike, which buffs your damage. They have the new version of Concealed Weapon, which is going to give you 10% bonus damage. They also have some nice healing. But a lot of those bonus, damage skills are like blade themed, so I don't really know if that fits in with a monk build. But if you don't care, if you just want a really good damage dealing unarmed build, probably Nightblade is going to be one of your best options. For the Necromancer, this doesn't fit very well in my opinion. I mean, if you want like a death monk of some type for your theme, sure, that could work. I think Blast Bones is actually a pretty good skill because it's going to do a lot of AoE damage, and unarmed attacks are single target, so it's going to help you a bit in the AoE department. They do have some good buffs and some good defense and some good healing, so it could be decent. Wardens, I think, could be good as well if you want sort of the nature-focused monk as your build type. You can use the bear pet if you want. You do have pretty decent AoE damage, really good defense and healing as well. I think some of their buffs, like Green Lotus, for example, last up to a minute, and it's going to give you healing back on light and heavy attacks, which is going to be actually pretty useful on this type of setup. So Warden is a good choice as well. I think Templar also for that reason, because of all the healing, is going to be good. Now, Templar specifically has access to the new Empower buff. They get that on the Solar Barrage skill, and this is going to be key for maximizing your damage with the unarmed setup. You need some form of Empower. You can get that from guild skills as well as some other abilities, but Templars have this in your class toolkit, so it's going to be really easy to do an unarmed build on the Templar. I think sorcerers do have some good options. We have Critical Surge, for example, which is going to help a lot with healing. And I have not tested it yet, but I think Crystal Weapon could be quite nice, pairing that with your light and heavy attacks. You've got lots of AoE damage. You also have a class Execute, so sorcerer could be pretty powerful. But ultimately, I went with Dragon Knight because I felt like Dragon Knights really fit the theme of the monk that I wanted to build. Obviously, you have all the flame abilities. Dragon Knights have Empower now in update 35. That's through the Molten Armament skill. So you'll be able to buff your heavy attacks as much as possible. You have solid healing with skills like Cauterize. You have really good ultimates. Standard of Might, just sitting in that as the monk build feels really good. And of course, the Dragon Leap is awesome as well. So that's what I chose for my monk setup. But like I said, you could probably make any class work. It just depends on what theme you're going for and how you want the build to play. All right, so here's the build. I'll give you a quick overview, starting with the stats. This isn't really meant to be a build video, but just kind of an idea. So it'll be partly build video and then partly suggestions for making this playstyle work. So let's go ahead and buff up. Check out the character sheet. So I did go with a Magicka focused build. You can see I got 30k max Magicka. I think this is going to be probably the way to go because you have a lot of support abilities that you need to run, and obviously you don't have any weapon skills, so Magicka seems to be the best way to go. Recoveries are really low, honestly, and that's fine. Mostly what I'm doing is heavy attack on my fists, so I don't need a lot of sustain, but having mostly max Magicka does help with that. Now, the weapon damage on the Dragonite is one of the best things about this. Now, the problem with unarmed is you don't have weapons, so your damage is going to be much lower than any other build currently. So any way that you can pump up either your weapon damage or your spell damage, going to be really helpful. Now, Dragonites do have minor brutality as well as major brutality. That's why my weapon damage is higher. So you can actually do a bit more damage on a Dragonite for that reason. You could also go with a Templar since they have minor sorcery and have extra spell damage on the Templar class. So those two options will be good, for doing a little bit of extra damage. Actually, I have a back bar weapon damage glyph too, so just so you can see on the Dragonite at least how high you could get it. About 4,300. Weapon damage is not bad. Again, considering we don't even have a weapon. If we did have a weapon, this would easily be, 6,000, 7,000 weapon damage, something like that. So that's a consideration that I'll talk about towards the end of the video, like what ZeniMax could do to actually make this work. But obviously, if we had like one-armed weapons that we could equip that would give us extra weapon and spell damage, that would be quite nice. 64 points into max Magicka. I'm focusing on Magicka for this build. I'm using Bewitched Sugar Skulls. I think Tri-Stat Food is really good. Like I said, we don't need recovery for this playstyle. We just need as much stats as possible. And then Thief Mundus. Actually, with the gear sets I am running, I think I'm up to about 50% crit with the Thief Mundus. So that is nice. That's another weakness of the build, because obviously you don't have weapons, you don't have weapon traits. If I had Precise as a weapon trait, then I'd be closer to 60% crit chance, which would be, much better. So Thief Mundus, though, just to do the best that you can. And that's the basic setup. As far as the race, I do have some suggestions for this. If you want to try it, what I recommend is any race that has weapon and spell damage. Because again, we don't have the base weapon and spell damage of any other build, so getting some extra weapon and spell damage from your race is going to be helpful, I think. So either High Elf, which is what I used, Dark Elf would be a good option, or the Orc. All three of those races have the max weapon and spell damage you'll be able to get, so that's what I recommend. That's the basic setup. Potions, I'm using Tri-Stat Potions. Doesn't really matter very much. Now, let's talk about the gear and what makes this kind of interesting. Now, the focus of this build is going to be heavy attack damage. And there's a lot of different heavy attack sets you can use in the game now. They did get sort of changed up for update 35. But what I like right now is Noble Duelist. So Noble Duelist gives you stam recovery, some good weapon and spell damage bonuses, and you can see when you deal damage with a light or heavy attack, you increase the damage of your light and heavy attacks against monsters by 2,100 for 15 seconds. So the nice thing about this is it's a very large buff to your heavy attacks and your light attacks. It has a good duration, 15 seconds, so it's very easy to maintain. Now this is a light armor set. I believe it comes from the Crucible dungeon, so it's base game. It's fairly easy to pick up, but I am running this mostly on the body. So I've got the hat, the shoulders, waist, hands, and feet. Again, those are all light armor pieces. I've got Divines on the trait to maximize our Mundus Stone. And there you go. That is our heavy attack focused set, because unarmed heavy attacks are not too bad this patch. All the heavy attacks did get buffed, which was another reason why I was trying out this build to see how much I could hit for with those unarmed heavies. Now, if you don't have that, or if you're looking for other, heavy attack sets, I guess, some other sets you can look out for is the Sergeant's Mail set. This is a very popular heavy attack set. It is heavy armor. Comes from Wayrest Sewers. The thing I don't like about Sergeant's Mail is it doesn't have great offensive stats, because it is a tank set. It is a heavy armor set. So you're getting like max health and health recovery, which are really not helping our damage at all. So you get a little bit less damage from the 2 through 4 piece set bonuses, but the 5 piece does do more damage. It's 645 bonus to your heavy attacks, and it stacks up to 4 times. So you have about 2,500, 2,600 bonus compared to the 2,100 that we get from Noble Duelist. But the other thing about Sergeant's Mail is you have to stack it up, and you can lose your stacks pretty easily. So yes, this is like the hardest hitting heavy attack set in the game right now, but you have to stack it up, and it's not ideal in some cases. So either way you want to go, totally fine. Just make sure you have one heavy attack focus set. And then the other set I went with was just a crit focus set. So this is the Crafted Order's Wrath set from the High Isle chapter. You can see this gives us nice offensive stats. It gives us a flat bonus to critical damage and critical healing. That's not a buff, so it's going to stack with everything else that we have. So it's a good set. Basically, any other damage-focused set you could do with something that increases your weapon and spell damage, maybe Briarheart, New Moon Acolyte, for example. You could do another crit-focused set. Mother Sorrow would be another option. So yeah, those are my two sets, my two 5-piece sets. We've got Order's Wrath in light on the body, so chest and legs, and then also jewelry. Here, weapon damage, we do want to stack that weapon damage as high as possible. And then either Infused or Bloodthirsty as your jewelry trait, just to sort of maximize that weapon damage. So that's the armor, the jewelry. I did decide to go with a back bar staff because I felt staff was, with a monk theme, it kind of works. I could see that, being used by a monk. And we really do need something for our back bar damage glyph. So I'm running, Wall of Elements with the Maelstrom staff. Now, Maelstrom staff is changing in Update 35 as well. It's no longer buffing your heavy attacks. There's another buff that's really powerful for heavy attacks. We'll talk about that when we look at the skills. But this is a little bit different, so just keep that in mind. But yeah, some type of back bar destruction staff I think really makes sense. So you can get that extra weapon and spell damage from running Wall of Elements. Now, here's the problem, which I'm sure you already realize, is that for an unarmed build, you can't use weapons, right? And so that means I'm down 2 set pieces. I would like to have, run a monster set or a mythic item on this build, but I just couldn't do it because I can't run weapons to do unarmed combat. I think this would actually be a really easy fix by the developers. All they would need to do is create some set pieces here that are like gloves or wrist wraps, something like that, that now drop for each armor set in the game. Those would be counted as weapons, just part of the loot table. So let's say that you were farming Mother Sorrow, for example, really common set in the game. One of the possible weapons you could get would be like a Fist of Mother Sorrow, or a wrist wrap of Mother Sorrow, or a brass knuckles of Mother Sorrow, something that I can equip in the hand slot, one for each hand. So they could do this a couple different ways. I think doing them as separate, so sort of like one-hand weapons, would probably be the best way to go. That way you could mix and match those weapons if you wanted to. But yeah, adding those items to the loot table would really free up some more options. Number one, it would increase our weapon and spell damage, like I said, by about 1,000 or 1,500. There's no bonus damage that's applied to unarmed attacks, right? Bonus damage that you get comes from weapons. You can see like on my Maelstrom staff, it says damage 1335. There's nothing that I can add to my fists right now to get that extra damage. So I am short on damage without those items. And then obviously it gives me 2 more set bonuses. So I could run a monster set, or I could run a front bar set or a mythic item or something like that on an unarmed build. I don't think it's that difficult to add. Like I said, just adding those items to the drop table. This is something that they did in previous test games. Skyrim, right, has gauntlets. You can play, unarmed builds using gauntlets in Skyrim. I don't think this would be that much different. So there you go. That's the gear set discussion. Let's talk about skills next. Now, obviously, there is no unarmed weapon skill. That's really the only other thing that's missing from this type of playstyle. If we had under our weapon skills a skill line for unarmed, that would be really, really nice. Right now, the basic attacks are okay, especially if you empower heavy attacks. It's pretty decent. But imagine if there was an unarmed skill line and we got things like a channeled, almost a rapid strikes, a rapid punch ability. Imagine if we had like a, like a spinning fist, like an AoE attack. It would be really cool to have these different abilities mixed into the unarmed build. We don't have those right now. You just have your basic attacks, but I think that would be pretty cool to add. So on the front bar, obviously, we don't have any weapon skills. This is where your class is really going to make a difference. Main thing I want to point out is something that has Empower. So Molten Armaments has Empower now for the Dragon Knight. If you're running Templar, Solar Barrage has Empower. This buffs your heavy attacks now by 80%, which is a huge bonus. So you will want that somewhere on your build. Good option if you don't have a class ability is anything from the Mages Guild. So if we look at the Mages Guild passives down here, which one is it? Mind of the Guild. Casting any Mages Guild ability grants you Empower, increasing the damage of your heavy attacks against monsters by 80% for 10 seconds. So as long as you're throwing in a Mages Guild ability every 10 seconds, and if you don't have a class skill, so you could run Entropy, you could run Scalding Rune, that's going to give you your Empower if your class does not have access to it. But other things I've got on the front bar, just because I'm a Dragon Knight, I've got Cauterize for the extra healing, also for passive Major Prophecy and Major Savagery, right? That's about 12% extra crit chance. Got Barbed Trap for the extra dot damage, as well as Minor Force. Heal on the front bar, I definitely want some healing on this build, so Ring of Preservation is good just for the AoE healing, Minor Protection, Minor Endurance buffs is pretty nice. Then we've got our armor buff, Volatile Armor, Molten Armaments as we said, and then a sort of passive ultimate on the front bar, Flawless Dawnbreaker. Back bar is our staff, so we do want, Wall of Elements, Blockade of Fire in this case. Damage doesn't really matter as much as the, extra weapon and spell damage we get from an infused glyph on the back bar. Couple other interesting skills here. Inner Beast. If you're playing solo, this does cause enemies to take 10% more damage from your attacks. So buffing those fist attacks is going to be kind of nice. Got Burning Embers for a dot and a heal. Noxious Breath for an AoE dot. Plus my Major Breach armor debuff. And then Structured Entropy for another single target dot and a heal over time. Along with Standard of Might. This is a very, very strong ultimate. Great for taking on bosses. Because this is going to buff your damage as well as your defense. All right, let's do a quick test on a world boss just to see how this works. So you're going to buff up with your damage buff, your Empower, your armor. I'm going to drop a heal and my dot. And I just go through my back bar dots as well. Got Burning Embers. Got my Breath. There you go. And then go ahead and just start punching away. Can drop my ult actually. You can see my if my unarmed attacks crit, they do about 30k damage, which is pretty decent. Drop that heal if needed. And then really I'm just heavy attacking on the front bar and then just recasting my dots on the back bar when I need to. Use my heal if I need to. Make sure I maintain my buffs. About one more rotation should do it here. There you go. Not too bad. Not too bad. So, not really optimized yet. I will say that, this build is not going to be good for all content, obviously. There's a couple things that we're missing still in terms of damage and skills, like we said. But for, normal content, whether you want to do world bosses, whether you want to do normal dungeons, I don't see anything wrong with that. The damage is decent. Solo, I'm doing anywhere from 25k to 30k DPS. I did test it briefly on a trial dummy. I hit about 45k to 50k. So the damage is not bad. The key, right, is that Empower buff for your heavy attacks. So that is it. Not really a build. Like I said, just some interesting things I had noticed. Let me know, obviously, what you think in the comments. Do you think this works? Do you want to try it? What else do you think ZeniMax could add to the game to make this play style even more viable?